need to leave. Now.
What? I'm just having coffee.
Manager says you're making people uncomfortable. You're trespassing.
I bought this coffee 10 minutes ago. I'm not bothering anyone.
Are you leaving or do I need to remove you?
You're making a mistake. FBI, Special
I don't
Agent
care
Monroe.
if you're the president, you're leaving.
Officer Craig Bartlett had been with the Seattle Police Department for 8 years when he walked into a situation that would destroy his career and cost the city $5.2 million. He was 33 years old, experienced enough to know better, but apparently convinced that his judgment was infallible. One Tuesday morning in a crowded downtown coffee shop, he received a call from a nervous manager about a suspicious person who didn't belong there. The suspicious person was Special Agent Jennifer Monroe, a 16-year FBI veteran sitting alone with her laptop and coffee, preparing for a meeting. What Bartlett did next, ignoring her credentials, dismissing witness testimony, and arresting her in front of dozens of morning customers, would become a textbook example of how racial profiling destroys lives and careers. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Peak Street Coffee sits on the corner of 4th Avenue and Pike Street in downtown Seattle. It's the kind of place that fills up every morning with professionals grabbing their caffeine before work, lawyers, tech workers, business people, students, high ceilings, exposed brick, Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and tables packed close together. It was 8:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Rain tapped against the large front windows. The morning rush was in full swing. Every table was occupied. The line at the counter stretched to the door. Special Agent Jennifer Monroe had been with the FBI for 16 years. 16 years working cases that require precision, patience, and an ability to see patterns others missed. She'd spent 8 years in financial crimes, dismantling money laundering operations and investment fraud schemes. 5 years before that, in cybercrimes, tracking down hackers who targeted infrastructure and financial institutions. 3 years in counterintelligence before that, she testified before grand juries, coordinated with the Treasury Department and SEC, and trained junior agents in forensic accounting. She'd received the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service. Her supervisors called her meticulous. Her colleagues called her the agent who never missed a detail. At 41 years old, Jennifer Monroe was exactly where she'd worked, to be trusted, respected, and given responsibility for complex investigations that required both intelligence and composure. That Tuesday morning, Monroe was off duty but preparing for a 9:30 a.m. meeting with a confidential informant in a federal investigation. She'd arrived at Peak Street Coffee at 7:50 a.m., ordered a large black coffee and a croissant, and claimed a small table near the window. She'd opened her laptop and spent the next 20 minutes reviewing her case notes, making sure she had her questions organized. She wore dark jeans, a gray blazer over a white blouse, and low heels. Professional, but not obviously law enforcement. Her FBI credentials were in her purse on the chair next to her. Her service weapon was locked in her car she rarely carried off duty unless the situation required it. She looked like what she was, a professional woman having coffee before a business meeting. She'd done nothing to attract attention. She'd spoken to no one except the barista who took her order. But to one person in that coffee shop, Jennifer Monroe's presence was a problem, and that person had decided to do something about it. Dylan Kershaw was 24 years old. He'd been the assistant manager at Peak Street Coffee for 18 months, hired right out of college with a degree in hospitality management and big plans to open his own cafe someday. He was enthusiastic, eager to please, and deeply concerned about maintaining what he called the right atmosphere for the shop. He wanted Peak Street to be a place where customers felt safe and comfortable, a place where the regular clientele, mostly white professionals, felt like they belonged. And this morning, Dylan Kershaw had noticed something that made him uncomfortable. A black woman, sitting alone, working on a laptop, taking up a table during the busy morning rush. She'd been there for nearly 30 minutes on a single coffee purchase. In Kershaw's mind, something didn't add up. This wasn't the usual customer. She didn't look like she fit the Peak Street profile. She must be homeless or jobless, camping out for free Wi-Fi. She was taking up space that paying customers needed. Never mind that she was a paying customer. Never mind that she was impeccably dressed. Never mind that dozens of other people in the shop had been there just as long or longer. Kershaw saw a black woman and decided she didn't belong. He watched her for 10 more minutes, working up the courage to do something about it. Then he pulled out his phone and called the police, non-emergency line. "Hi, I'm the manager at Peak Street Coffee on Pike Street. We have a person here who's been loitering for a long time and making customers uncomfortable. Could you send an officer?" The dispatcher asked standard questions. Is the person being threatening? Causing a disturbance? No, but she's been here a really long time and she's making people uncomfortable just by being here. Is she a paying customer? Kershaw hesitated. She bought a coffee, but that was like 30 minutes ago. Has she violated any store policies? Not exactly, but I need her to leave. The call was logged. A unit was dispatched. Officer Craig Bartlett responded. Do you think managers should face consequences for calling police on customers based on racial bias? Drop your answer below. Craig Bartlett had been with the Seattle Police Department for 8 years. In that time, he'd compiled a record that should have raised red flags at every level of supervision. 11 complaints. 11. 8 of them involved allegations of racial profiling or excessive force against people of color. 3 had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory retraining. The other 8 had been closed with insufficient evidence, or not sustained findings, despite witness statements and circumstantial evidence. Bartlett had a pattern. He responded aggressively to calls involving people of color in spaces where he didn't think they belonged. A black family having a barbecue in a public park, Bartlett demanded to see their permit and threatened citations when they questioned his authority. A Hispanic teenager skateboarding near a shopping center, Bartlett detained him for 45 minutes, searching his backpack without consent. An Asian man photographing architecture downtown Bartlett questioned whether he was conducting surveillance for terrorism. The pattern was clear, the documentation was extensive, but somehow Bartlett remained on patrol. His supervisors noted in evaluations that he was results-oriented but sometimes lacking in community sensitivity, and that he should improve his approach to de-escalation. But those notes never translated into meaningful consequences. When Bartlett received the call about Peak Street Coffee, his mind immediately filled in a narrative. Loitering suspect, manager wants them removed, probably homeless, probably causing problems. He arrived at the coffee shop at 8:27 a.m., parking his patrol car directly in front. He walked in, scanning the crowded space, looking for someone who seemed out of place. His eyes landed on Jennifer Monroe, a black woman, sitting alone, laptop open, looking too comfortable. In Bartlett's mind, that had to be the problem. He walked directly toward her table. Monroe was reviewing a timeline in her case notes when she became aware of someone standing next to her table. She looked up and saw a police officer, arms crossed, staring down at her. "You need to leave. Now." Monroe blinked, confused. "Excuse me? I'm just having coffee." "This is private property. You're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Monroe gestured to her coffee cup. "I'm a paying customer. I bought this coffee 10 minutes ago." That was a lie. It had been 35 minutes, and the cup was nearly empty, but Monroe didn't think she needed to justify how long she'd been sitting there. Bartlett's jaw tightened. The manager called, said, "You're making people uncomfortable. Time to go." Monroe looked around. No one was even looking at her. The shop was full of people working on laptops, having conversations, sitting alone. Making people uncomfortable? "I'm sitting here reading. I haven't done anything. Are you going to leave, or do I need to remove you?" Monroe felt her stomach drop. She'd been a federal agent long enough to recognize what was happening. This wasn't about loitering. This wasn't about policy. This was about a manager who saw a black woman and decided she didn't belong. "Look, I'm Special Agent Monroe, FBI. I'm off duty, just having coffee before a meeting." Bartlett's expression didn't change. "I don't care if you're the president. You're leaving. Now show me some ID." Monroe reached into her purse and pulled out her FBI credentials, the black leather case with the gold badge and identification card. She opened it and held it up. "Here, FBI credentials. Special Agent Jennifer Monroe. Now do you understand this is a mistake?" Bartlett glanced at the badge. His expression hardened. "Anyone can print a fake badge. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." The coffee shop had gone quiet. Conversation stopped. People turned to stare. Phones came out. Monroe's voice remained calm, but the edge was unmistakable. "Officer, that is a legitimate federal credential. You can verify it with one phone call to the Seattle FBI field office. I'm asking you to do that before this goes any further. Stand up now." "I'm not standing up. I'm a federal agent. I've committed no crime. I've violated no policy, and you have no legal authority to remove me." This is where bias becomes impenetrable. Officer Bartlett had responded to a call about a black woman in a coffee shop. When he arrived, he saw a black woman in a coffee shop. In his mind, that confirmed the complaint. Every piece of evidence after that, the credentials, the calm demeanor, the professional appearance, was filtered through his initial assumption. He wasn't looking at an FBI agent. He was looking at someone trying to avoid arrest. Should officers be required to verify federal credentials before making arrests in non-emergency situations? Let me know what you think. Monroe knew she had a choice. She could continue to assert her rights and risk this escalating to violence. Or she could comply, let this catastrophic mistake play out, and deal with the consequences later. She chose documentation over resistance. "I'm complying under protest," Monroe said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the shop to hear. "I am Special Agent Jennifer Monroe, FBI. This officer is arresting me for sitting in a coffee shop. Everyone here is witnessing this. Please record it." Several people were already recording. A woman near the counter pulled out her phone. A man at the next table angled his camera toward them. Monroe stood slowly, gathering her laptop and closing it. Bartlett grabbed her arm roughly. "Hands behind your back. Don't touch me like that. I'm complying. There's no need for force." Bartlett yanked her arm harder, spinning her around. He pulled her arms behind her back and snapped handcuffs on. The cuffs were tight, deliberately tight. Monroe winced but said nothing. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer." I didn't resist. Everyone here saw that I complied. And I'm not trespassing. I'm a paying customer. The crowd had grown. Someone near the door called out, "This is wrong. She didn't do anything." Another voice, "She's been sitting there for 30 minutes. Nobody complained. She's just working on her computer." Bartlett ignored them. He marched Monroe toward the door, still handcuffed, her purse and laptop left behind on the table. Outside, Monroe saw what she'd expected. Body cameras, dash cameras, witnesses, evidence. This was all being documented. "Officer Bartlett," Monroe said, reading his nameplate, "you are arresting a federal agent without cause. You refused to verify my credentials. You used unnecessary force, and you're doing it in front of dozens of witnesses. This will end your career." Bartlett opened the back door of his patrol car. "Get in. I want your badge number, I want your supervisor's name, and I want to know who called this in. You'll get all that at the station." He guided her into the back seat, closed the door, and got behind the wheel. As he pulled away from the curb, Monroe looked back at the coffee shop. People were standing outside now, phones up, recording. The story was already spreading. Why do some officers interpret calm professionalism and federal credentials as deception? Comment your thoughts. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes. Monroe spent it documenting everything mentally. Times, statements, actions. She testified in dozens of federal trials. She knew how to build a case. And this case was building itself. They arrived at the precinct. Bartlett walked her inside, still handcuffed, past the front desk, where a sergeant looked up with immediate concern. "Bartlett, what do you have?" "Trespassing at Peak Street Coffee." Suspect refused to leave when asked by the manager and by me. The desk sergeant stood. Did she resist? She refused to comply with a lawful order. Monroe spoke up, her voice clear and controlled. "Sergeant, I am Special Agent Jennifer Monroe, FBI. I was sitting in a coffee shop having coffee before a meeting. The manager called police because I'm black. Officer Bartlett arrested me after I showed him my federal credentials, which he dismissed as fake. I complied completely. There was no resistance, and this entire incident is on video from multiple witnesses." The desk sergeant's face went pale. "She showed you FBI credentials?" Bartlett pulled the credentials from his pocket and handed them over. Claims they're real. The sergeant examined them carefully. The badge, the ID card, the hologram, the seal. Everything about them screamed authentic. "Bartlett, these are real. They're real. I've seen enough federal credentials to know." He looked at Monroe. "Ma'am, what's your badge number?" Monroe recited it from memory. The sergeant picked up the phone. "I'm calling the FBI field office right now." The confirmation came back within 3 minutes. "Special Agent Jennifer Monroe, active duty, Financial Crimes Division, 16 years of service." The sergeant hung up and turned to Bartlett, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "You arrested an FBI agent for sitting in a coffee shop after she showed you her credentials." The manager said, "I don't care what the manager said. You verify before you arrest. That's basic procedure. Take those cuffs off her right now." Bartlett unlocked the handcuffs. Monroe rubbed her wrist. Deep red marks were visible where the metal had dug into her skin. A lieutenant arrived within minutes. Sarah Chan, a 21-year veteran who'd seen plenty of officer mistakes, but rarely one this egregious. Someone explained what happened. The desk sergeant briefed her quickly. Chan listened, her expression darkening. Then she turned to Monroe. "Agent Monroe, on behalf of the Seattle Police Department, I sincerely apologize. This is inexcusable." Monroe nodded but remained silent. She was building her case. Every word mattered. Chen turned to Bartlett. "Badge and weapon. Administrative leave, effective immediately." "Lieutenant, I was responding to a call. You arrested a federal agent for drinking coffee while black. Give me your badge." Bartlett handed them over, his hands shaking. For the first time, he seemed to understand what he'd done. Should officers face automatic termination after wrongful arrests of federal agents? Drop your answer. Within 2 hours, the videos had exploded across social media. Multiple angles from different witnesses in the coffee shop, Monroe identifying herself, showing her badge, being handcuffed anyway, being marched out like a criminal. FBI agent arrested in Seattle coffee shop for making people uncomfortable. Federal agent handcuffed after showing credentials to officer who called them fake. For coffee while black trends, after FBI agent arrested for sitting in Starbucks-style cafe. The outrage was immediate and intense. The FBI issued a formal statement condemning the arrest. The NAACP called for an investigation. Civil rights organizations demanded accountability. The manager who called 911, Dylan Kershaw, gave a brief statement to local media. "I thought she was loitering. I didn't know she was FBI." He was fired within 24 hours. Peak Street Coffee issued a public apology and announced new policies prohibiting calls to police based on customer complaints unless there was actual criminal behavior. But the real damage was done. The video showed everything. A black woman, professionally dressed, working on her laptop, showing federal credentials, being arrested anyway. Civil rights attorneys contacted Monroe within hours. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was racial profiling. This was a civil rights violation. This was proof that even a federal badge wasn't enough to protect black people from bias. The lawsuit named Officer Craig Bartlett, Lieutenant Sarah Chin, for supervisory failure, Dylan Kershaw, the manager, Peak Street Coffee, and the Seattle Police Department. The claims were extensive: unlawful arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment, violation of federal civil rights, racial profiling and discrimination, excessive use of force, tight handcuffs, unnecessary physical contact, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to verify credentials despite repeated requests, failure to train and supervise officers with documented patterns of discriminatory policing. The city's attorneys and Peak Street's insurance lawyers reviewed the evidence and reached the same conclusion: indefensible. The videos were everywhere. The witnesses were credible. The FBI was involved. The city settled within 10 months. $5.2 million paid to Special Agent Jennifer Monroe. Peak Street Coffee contributed an additional $800,000 from their liability insurance. Officer Craig Bartlett was terminated 9 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final and devastating. Officer Bartlett arrested a federal agent without probable cause, refused to verify legitimate credentials, and engaged in racial profiling. Despite 11 prior complaints and multiple training interventions, Officer Bartlett continued to demonstrate discriminatory policing practices. His employment is terminated immediately. Bartlett's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career was over at 33 years old. Dylan Kershaw, the manager who made the call, faced his own consequences. Fired from Peak Street, named in the lawsuit, his name permanently associated with racial profiling. He issued a statement: "I made a terrible mistake based on unconscious bias. I'm deeply sorry, but apologies don't undo trauma." Should businesses face financial penalties for racially motivated 911 calls? Let me know in the comments. The Seattle Police Department faced intense scrutiny. How had Bartlett, with 11 complaints over 8 years, remained on patrol? Why hadn't supervisors removed him after the 3rd complaint? The 8th, what training existed to prevent officers from arresting people for existing while black? Internal Affairs conducted a comprehensive review. The findings were damning. 11 complaints over 8 years, 3 sustained, 8 closed without meaningful investigation. Multiple witnesses in prior complaints whose statements were ignored. Training requirements completed but never assessed for effectiveness. Supervisors who noted problems in evaluations but took no action. A system that protected officers over community members. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation. Their findings confirmed systemic failure at every level. Reforms were announced: immediate desk duty for any officer with 5 or more complaints related to discrimination. Mandatory federal credential verification before any arrest. Real-time body camera review for all arrests, independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, quarterly pattern analysis of all officer stops and arrests, flagging racial disparities, automatic federal notification when any law enforcement officer is arrested. Special Agent Jennifer Monroe testified at City Council hearings. Her testimony was powerful. "I'm a federal agent with 16 years of experience. I had my credentials. I identified myself clearly. I was sitting in a coffee shop having coffee, and I was arrested because I'm black." She paused. "I wasn't loitering. I was working. I wasn't causing a disturbance. I was sitting quietly. I wasn't making anyone uncomfortable except apparently a manager who couldn't imagine that a black woman in professional clothing belonged in his coffee shop." Another pause. "This happens every day. To black people who don't have FBI badges. To people who don't have the resources to fight back. To people whose arrests don't make the news. If this can happen to me, with all my credentials and authority, what happens to everyone else?" The room was silent. Should racial profiling in commercial spaces trigger automatic federal civil rights investigations? Drop your answer. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was proof that for some people, no credential is enough when bias has made its decision. Jennifer Monroe showed her FBI badge. She identified herself verbally, clearly, repeatedly. She was professionally dressed, calmly working, violating no law, and none of it mattered. Because Officer Bartlett saw a black woman in a space where his biased mind said black women didn't belong. The badge had to be fake. The credentials had to be counterfeit. The calm professionalism had to be an act. His bias was so complete, it overrode physical evidence held in his hands. This is how systemic racism operates in everyday spaces. It's not always violent or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, insidious, built on assumptions that seem reasonable until examined. It's a manager who sees a black customer and assumes they're loitering. It's an officer who sees a black professional and assumes they're a criminal. It's a system that validates those assumptions until someone with power and resources fights back. And when that bias is backed by the authority to arrest, to handcuff, to remove someone from a public space, it doesn't just harm individuals. It sends a message: you don't belong here, no matter your credentials, no matter your rights, no matter your humanity. Craig Bartlett's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $5.2 million. That's accountability. Dylan Kershaw was fired. That's consequences. But money and terminations don't undo the trauma of being arrested for drinking coffee. They don't restore the dignity of being handcuffed in front of dozens of strangers. They don't erase the message that even an FBI badge isn't enough to protect you from bias. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally remove officers after 5 complaints instead of 11? Do businesses finally train staff to recognize their bias before calling 911? Do we finally acknowledge that making people uncomfortable often means existing while black? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Bartlett on patrol for 8 years despite 11 complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught Kershaw to see black customers as threats, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next manager, the next victim, the next viral video. Comment if you believe this should be law. Businesses that call police on paying customers without evidence of actual crime face mandatory civil rights review and financial penalties. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button, because we're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the FBI agents, the coffee drinkers, the ordinary people who deserve to exist in public spaces without being criminalized. This isn't just about one officer, one manager, or one agent. It's about all of us and the world we're willing to accept.